Spy master, soldier, revolutionary, terrorist? We are the Spy-Fi guys, and this is Michael Collins.
Welcome to the Spy-Fi guys, where we cover spy fact, spy fiction, and everything in between. I'm Christian.
And I'm Zach. And top of the morning to you, sir.
Oh, come on. Well, you can get away with doing an Irish accent. I mean, I can do it. It's just, maybe I probably shouldn't.
No, I'm not going to. They're pretty sensitive about that. But as you may have deduced, today we're going to the Emerald Isle of the movie Michael Collins, starring Liam Neeson, Alan Rickman, and Julia Roberts.
Why don't you explain to our listeners who Michael Collins, the Irish revolutionary, is?
So the movie that we're looking at today was made in 1996, and it's about Michael Collins of the same name, and he was the head of the Irish Republican Army's intelligence and general mayhem division, and basically fought a Cold War insurgency against British occupiers in 1918 to 1922.
Well, judging from the movie, it didn't seem like a very Cold War. It seemed quite bloody, but we can get into it as we get into the movie.
Yeah, I should say it was more like an insurgency. It was more like the Iraqi insurgents fighting the U.S. military in Iraq. That's what it reminded me of. If you're interested in watching the movie and you haven't seen it yet, you can find it on Vudu. That's VUDU. It has free movies with commercials. So if you want to pause the podcast and go watch it, we can wait. We'll be right here.
Yeah, so here's a synopsis. Neil Jordan's historical biopic of Irish revolutionary Michael Collins, the man who led a guerrilla war against the UK, helped negotiate the creation of the Irish Free State, and led the National Army during the Irish Civil War.
Yes.
That's a lot.
I know. There's a lot to cover, and there's a lot going on in this movie. I am very excited to talk with you about it and hear what you think.
Yeah, so the movie starts with, the longest... what would you call a block of text that I've seen in a movie, and I was taking notes on it, and it just kept going.
There's a lot of dump. It reminded me of Star Wars and the opening text crawl there, except it was even more packed with details.
Yeah, it's even longer than one of those. Those are 3 paragraphs, maybe. This is 5 paragraphs.
And it effectively tells you everything that's happening in the movie, everything that's going to happen in the movie, I should say.
Yeah,
of course, you can't spoil real life.
But I mean, well, this, along with, the opening scene, basically tells us that he's going to die.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
All right, am I watching this if I know he's going to die? All right, so the very beginning starts with Joe O'Reilly, who's one of, basically his right-hand man at this point, telling the story of how he died to Kitty Kiernan.
Who was played by Julia Roberts.
Yeah, which I did not expect her to see her in this, and nor did I expect to see her speaking with an Irish accent.
Well, as I said to you before we started watching, she kind of gives up on the Irish accent halfway through the movie.
Yeah, she does, and then it picks up again. Right in the middle, it's it just disappears, and then it comes back. So
if you're a Julia Roberts fan, and I remember growing up, people were really into her, and I feel like this is not what you think of when you think of a Julia Roberts movie. So whatever it takes to get. I also think, and this is as good time to mention as any. So this was one of those historical epics that they loved in the 90s. It was right up there with a bunch of Mel Gibson movies. I mean, obviously the battle scenes are not as good as something like Braveheart, but like those other movies, they were well, we needed women to go see it, and women don't care about anything other than romance. So let's just put a romance in.
Well, from what I've read, that is a real romance that happened.
Yeah, but it's given, in my opinion, a lot of prominence in the movie where it doesn't always fit. But we can get into that later.
All right. So it starts with, basically after his death, telling Kitty, how he died and why he died, and then it flashes back all the way to the Easter Uprising.
That's correct. So it was a failed revolution against Britain, and it's called the Easter Uprising. One of many, but it's famous because it was the last one before Michael Collins' guerrilla war. It's referenced in many songs, many stories. One of them that you may know is the Cranberries song "Zombie."
Oh,
there's a lyric in it that goes, there's a lyric it's the same old thing since 1916.
Oh, okay. So it's the same old thing since 1916. Oh, okay. So it's the same old thing since 1916. Oh, okay. So it's the same old thing since 1916. Oh, okay. So it's the same old thing since 1916. Oh, okay. So it's the same old thing since 1916. Oh, okay. So it's the same old thing since 1916. Oh, okay. So it's the same old thing since 1916. Oh, okay. So it's the same old thing since 1916. Oh, okay. So it's the same old thing since 1916. Oh, okay. So it's the same old thing since 1916. Oh, okay. So it's the same old thing since 1916. Oh, okay. So it's the same old thing since 1916. Oh, okay. So it's the same old thing since 1916. Oh, okay. So it's the same old thing since 1916. Oh, okay. So it's the same old thing since 1916. Oh, okay. So it's the same old thing since 1916. Oh, okay. So it's the same old thing since 1916. Oh, okay. So it's the same old thing since 1916. Oh, okay. So it's the same old thing since Yes, well, this is actually not my first introduction to the Easter Uprising. I was a big fan of the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles as a kid, and one of the episodes has him traveling to Ireland on the eve of the Easter Uprising.
Well, I'm going to need to watch that episode then, because I'm really into Irish stuff. So the scene where this big battle is taking place, where they're getting shot at and bombed with artillery, and that's where we first meet Michael Collins, is at the General Post Office in downtown Dublin, which I went to while I was there. Got my picture in front of it. I'll try to remember to put it on our social media page around the time that we do this episode. And if you go and see it, there's still bullet holes left in some of the columns from the uprising.
Wow. Okay. But yes, so we have bunch of, after the uprising fails, you have a bunch of people getting arrested.
One of whom is Eamon DeValera, played by Alan Rickman,
who's known throughout this by his nickname Dev, which I didn't like. I guess I didn't have the captions on all the time, so I thought it was just one word, DeValera. I was like, oh, that's why it said. But looking at it's actually De Valera. So I was like, okay, interesting. And apparently, he was an American citizen.
The leaders go to prison, but not everyone involved in the uprising does. But De Valera is one of them.
Right.
And then also at this part, Collins is played by Liam Neeson, as a famous quote where he says, "Next time we won't play by their rules."
Yeah. And so as Dev's in prison, he's writing messages to everyone and saying, what is the message about? We defeat the British Empire by ignoring it.
So we have more reprisals that shows the leaders being killed, and De Valera says this brings more people to our side. And then we have a time jump to May 1918 after Collins comes back from his exile in the UK.
Yeah, and so this is where we're first sort of introduced to, to Kitty. Although I'm kind of trying to piece together what that exactly was. It was just like just meeting them at, what was it, a reading?
Yeah, but actually, I'm sorry, we jumped ahead a little bit. There's just one quick thing I wanted to mention. Yeah. So he arrives and he immediately gets tailed by the Royal Irish Constabulary, which is the police, but they also serve as spies for the British occupiers. And there's two great things from this scene. The first is I saw a postcard that says "Rush Hour in Ireland," and it shows a bunch of sheep on a road. And that's literally what happens here. And then he has a cool line where he's like, "They know everything about us. They know what we eat for breakfast." And he says, "Well, then what are we going to do about it?" He says, "Find out what they eat for breakfast."
And so and Michael Collins literally goes, so they got stuck in their little traffic jam and they can't get out. So Michael Collins literally goes back to the people tailing him and says, "What do you guys have for breakfast?"
Right. And then one of them you may recognize from V for Vendetta. Stephen Ray is the actor. He played Ned Roy. We'll get to know him later. And he was the police officer in V for Vendetta. So not exactly branching out there. So then we have that. And then there's a scene where Collins basically incites a riot without meaning to.
Right.
This scene is on the poster. It's him like yelling at people. And I like the part where he's like, "Who will take my place?" And everyone's like, "I'll take your place." That was really good. Okay, so we can go back to the scene with Kitty.
And both, so it's him and Collins and his best friend, Harry Boland. And looks like they're both sort of interested in Kitty. And this is like the sort of pseudo love triangle that carries through most of the film.
Also of note in this scene is that she sings the Irish song "She Moved Through the Fair," which is very famous, very well known. I knew that. And then when they kind of peer pressure Collins into singing a song, and which he sort of does, it's a song "Left Old Skibbereen," which has some references to British oppression. So, of course, that would be his choice of something to sing. Okay, so the next scene is they make the Invisible Army. And Collins explains that the way they get weapons is by robbing an arsenal by pretending to have weapons.
Right, yes. Or not, or I think they had weapons, they just had no bullets.
Right, but they didn't know that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that's a pretty good strategy, I think, yeah.
And that was how they were able to get the revolution started. So he goes to a pub and Broy is back and there's a confrontation. I was like, is Christian going to like this? This is spy stuff. Well, Collins is like, you're a G-man, and Broy tips him off that the leaders of the Irish Republicans are going to be arrested.
Yeah, so, and he brings that information to the what is it? No, it's not quite the council. Is it
the
whatever
cabinet.
The government? The cabinet. Thank you.
Yeah, the cabinet, right.
Cabinet. Mm-hmm. And so he tells them, we all got to go somewhere else. This is the list of our names and addresses, and they're going to come for all of us. And Dev's like, no, we stay where we are.
Mm-hmm.
And also, every one of them gets either rounded up. Do they kill a bunch of them? I'm trying to remember now.
So they don't kill them in this point. They killed the Easter Uprising people, but they just arrested the cabinet. So also in the scene with the cabinet meeting, people tell Collins that his brief is intelligence, and Collins says it is intelligence, which is why we're covering it on this podcast, but also gun running and general mayhem.
General mayhem. So it's a good title.
So of course the cabinet does get arrested. Broy proves his trustworthiness to Collins and that his info was correct. A little behind the scenes, the reason why they were getting arrested was allegedly under suspicion of collaborating with the Germans, but there was no evidence they were.
Germans? All right.
Yeah.
Because this is World War I, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That is ridiculous.
I mean, obviously it was a pretension to stop the revolutionary movement before it got started. And it worked out. So Sinn Féin, I think, is the political party that was like the major driver of republicanism, which is creation of an Irish Republic. Usual disclaimer that I don't claim to know everything about this history, and if I get something wrong, I apologize. So they used the opportunity to gain political capital, and Collins did as well, because while everyone else was in prison, he was able to become the effective leader of the Irish Revolutionary Bureau, which is like the IRA, and Sinn Féin itself.
But yeah, so Broy is turned by all of Collins' speeches, because he's tailing Collins and is hearing all the speeches and realizes, what am I doing? This I'm on the wrong side here.
So it's in the beginning, it's important to mention, especially for those of you who aren't up on all your different types of white people, is that in the beginning, everyone is Irish, including the occupiers. They were effectively serving as arms of the British, but they were Irish.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah. So we get another relationship scene. Harry comes back from a date with Kitty, and Michael Collins says, "I'll wrestle you for her," and then they start wrestling like in the middle of the night. Collins mentions nobody knows what I look like, even though he was making a public speech earlier.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And that was how he was able to do his guerrilla war, because everyone knew that Michael Collins was public enemy number one, but they didn't have a good picture of him, so they couldn't find him.
Like.
So then we get more spy stuff where Broy and Collins break into the IRB, and he starts looking through their files.
Mm-hmm.
So he nearly gets caught when a policeman comes back to check in the situation. Broy stalls him, and then Collins climbs to the ceiling to avoid being detected.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, Christian's got to like this. This is like Mission Impossible 1918 edition.
Yeah, no, that was, I did like that. Okay, breaking into that and using all of their old intel against them. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But of course, the conclusion from this is that the IRC, the Irish Republican Side, the IRC, knows everything about them. They could squash us in a week, says Collins. So what are you going to do about that?
Well, basically, cause general mayhem.
But the way they do it is they get information about administration officials, and they send them basically death threats.
That's right.
It says, quote, collaboration punishable by death, signed to the Irish Republican Army. And by the way, something to mention is that there's actually multiple versions of the Irish Republican Army. So when I was growing up in the 90s, they were the known, when people thought of terrorism, they thought of the Irish Republican Army.
Right, that's the why.
Provisional. Yeah, that's the provisional Irish Republican Army. These guys are not them. They were active 50 years earlier. Actually, more like 70 years earlier. Mm-hmm. And Collins points out that the problem with this plan is that they'd have to kill their own people, because as I mentioned earlier, everyone was Irish.
Right, and so Collins is basically saying, isn't this part where he's saying that, there's no shame in, saying that you can't do it, just don't away.
It's a difficult question.
Mm-hmm.
This is not a situation where you have the French partisans fighting the Nazis. That is not that.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess we'll bring up the general question the movie, a question the movie broaches but never answers because it never can be answered is, was Collins's violence justified?
Yeah, it's a tricky question.
Well, so something to consider is that the British Empire was going to, we know looking back on it, that the British Empire would have been gone within 50 years. But 50 years is a lifetime. Collins would have been an old man by then. On the other hand, the British were not, they were very brutal occupiers, but they weren't the Nazis either. So before they break DeValera out, the campaign against the collaborators, we can call them, begins. And we have a lot of scenes of a guy just walking down the street and then another random person runs up to them and shoots them dead.
That's right.
And so this is why some people saw Collins as a terrorist.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not terrorism in the way that we know it now, because these guys were not civilians. They were cops, but cops are not soldiers. So it's a gray area.
Mm-hmm.
I sort of see it as like the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, where it's too big of a question for us to answer. And history may never know, but it is what it is. But the reality is that what Collins recognized was that the only way that this is sort of, actually, it's not just here, but it's counterinsurgencies in general. Insurgencies in general operate with intelligence, with spies, collaborators, and informers. And if you can get the people to stop collaborating and informing, then the British won't know who to hit, and they'll hit anybody, and that turns the people against them, which is exactly what happens.
So it's after this that they break Dev out of prison, and they like dress him up in like a fur coat and a hat to make him look like a woman that they're sneaking out. And at this point, Dev decides he's going to go to the U.S. Collins is like, wait, we just broke you up and you're leaving now? Who's supposed to be, you're supposed to be our leader. What are you doing?
Mm-hmm.
And let's see.
Well, so this is sort of, it's like a hawk versus dove question, where Collins is like, the only language, I think he literally says the only language they understand is violence, which is a thing people say. Whereas DeValera says, well, if we don't need to fight them, we can just get America to pressure them into giving up, basically. Another raid, another narrow escape through the roof again. I also noticed that Collins and Harry Boland sleep in the same bed still. I'm like, what's up with that? They never explain it. New cops arrive from Belfast, which you can tell because they speak slightly differently, and they say you need a little bit of Belfast efficiency, and then they immediately get car bombed.
Oof.
And I was like, is that supposed to be a joke because they got killed very efficiently?
Maybe
not. Harry Boland goes with Dev to America, and Collins makes a move on Kitty like immediately after Harry leaves.
Mm-hmm.
It's called the Harrison Ford School of Seduction.
Ooh. Yeah. So, and around this time is also when the British decide, all right, you guys are doing stuff. We're going to send basically a secret intelligence service agent named Soames to run a new squad to combat the IRA.
Yep, and he's played by Charles Dance, who, of course, we know from Game of Thrones. He's the elite of the British Secret Service, and they're sent to eliminate you and your boys.
Which I found interesting because there's another movie called, what is it? I think it's Spy Maker, The Secret Life of Ian Fleming, where Charles Dance plays Ian Fleming. So immediately in my mind, that connected. Oh, that's the head of the best SIS agent. Well, played by Charles Dance. Interesting.
It's a little weird to see your boys in the British intelligence being the bad guys for a change.
Yeah, just a little.
I mean, it's not wrong. So I like what I liked about this. One of the things I liked about this introduction of the British arrival is, first of all, you got that sepia toned old footage that like blends into color.
Mm-hmm.
And this was filmed at the barracks, which is now known as the Collins Barracks, named after Michael Collins, which I have also been there. It's in Dublin too. So then we also get a scene of the Black and Tans' arrival in Dublin. The Black and Tans are very infamous in Irish history. If you want to get people mad at you, just pretend to like them. They were British paramilitary, so they weren't even soldiers, and they're called the Black and Tans because of their uniforms.
Mm-hmm.
And we see a scene of them driving through Dublin, and people start throwing stuff at them, and they respond by shooting.
Right.
So this particular battle, I don't know if it's real, but it certainly seems like the kind of stuff that they would do.
Yes, this is also the time where like they go to like a football match and start just shooting up the entire crowd.
That's right.
Oof, that was like that was.
Mm-hmm. That was a bloody Sunday.
No sense to me. Oh, is that see, like as you might guess, I don't have that much knowledge of Irish history, so I mean I know of Bloody Sunday, but I didn't know that's what that was.
Well, you know what doesn't help is that there's like 15 Bloody Sundays, and they're not
really?
all in Ireland, but a lot of them are. This was one of them.
Jeez.
But the one that all the songs are about, like the John Lennon song, that was in 1972, and it refers to the shooting of civilian protesters by British paratroopers in Derry, Northern Ireland.
I see.
But this is something else. This is Bloody Sunday 1920.
Could they not come up with more other names?
Well, if it's Sunday and it's bloody, I guess there you go. Actually, I'm going to need to make sure. Well, we'll get into it for spy fact versus spy fiction, but it doesn't quite go down the way the movie depicts.
Okay.
Broy is killed as things kind of escalate. They find out that he is informing on them, and then he is killed and dumped. Charles Dance is also killed.
Yeah, so this is during that whole time. Like it's like this reminded me of like the Godfather montage at the end of the first Godfather.
Yeah, I could see that.
It's just all these people being killed at once as something else is going on. Basically as what Kitty and Collins are getting closer, and then everyone else is getting killed.
Mm-hmm.
So you have Charles Dance being killed by what was it? Because he had an Irish maid, and so the Irish maid comes in and he's telling doing her usual routine, and right as he's getting himself ready, someone opens a side door and shoots him up.
Yep. So Charles Dance, like everybody else, was not killed while in the process of, this was not to save a life. It was killing people in their homes. Mm-hmm. But of course, this was how the British occupiers operate too, is they would get informers and then they just kick in the door and arrest them in their home. Mm-hmm. So we get all this. Carrie comes back, and him and Collins argues about, it's him and DeValera and Collins all arguing about whether the method is working. Mm. Collins is saying, the British are willing to negotiate. That's proof that my method is working. DeValera says, but they're calling you a murderer, to which Collins responds, war is murder, sheer bloody murder. Any thoughts?
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, it's the difference between like a formal army and then like guerrilla army, and it's guerrilla army may be more effective in that way, but it's also I don't know. Yeah.
Well, it's also worth pointing out that this is still 1918, and it wasn't that long ago where armies would stand across the field from each other and shoot each other stupidly. So this idea of breaking into people's houses and killing them was still new. But of course, the 20th century, it would not be so new.
So at this point, at that same cabinet meeting, Dev decides, okay, we're going to be more like a traditional army, and we're going to have, attack the Custom House, which is the center of British admin in Ireland.
Yeah.
And of course, it fails spectacularly. They would kill 6 men, or no, 6 of the IRA are killed, and 70 are captured. Mm-hmm. And so just like Colin said, this is going to go terribly, and it did. And now, the IRA is down to its last few men basically, and Collins tells Dev that they can only hold out for maybe a month or more.
Right.
But even less, actually, more like a week. And so it's this time we get some more scenes between Kitty and Harry and
more love triangle stuff. Finally, they're at a dance, and the news comes in. It's over. They call the truce. It's finished. The whole damn thing.
So I thought that was just like really anticlimactic. I was like, wait, really? It's not a trap. It's just it's just like that.
Well, all of the shooting is over, but you're only halfway through the movie, so you're like, what's going to happen? And as it turns out, it's not over. It's actually just getting started. So the Irish government want to send Collins to London to negotiate a treaty, not just a ceasefire. And he says, no way, I'm no good at talk.
Yeah, I'm with Collins on this. Like, why of all the people to send, you're going to send him?
Well, I have a theory. So there's two theories. So the book that I read, which is called Big Fellow, Long Fellow, and we'll talk about in the Spy Fact versus Spy Fiction, theorizes that his that his competitors in the government were setting him up to fail. They were like, he's going to go and he's going to fail, and then we can go and we can get better terms for us. Another theory is that he's like Menachem Begin. Are you familiar with Menachem Begin?
Nope.
So he was the first right-winger elected in Israel, the first right-wing prime minister. And he ran on a platform of the Arab countries are never going to accept us. They're never going to be friends with us. They've tried to destroy us 3 times. So you need someone strong and someone conservative like me in order to protect the country. Sound like anybody we know? But he was the first one to negotiate Israel's first peace treaty with Egypt. And the reason why was because it was like only Nixon could go to China. Because only a right-winger... Because if a peacenik goes and comes back with a peace treaty, everyone's going to be like, well, of course they agreed because they want peace. They'll sign anything. But a right-winger will not. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So the movie skips all of the negotiations.
Yeah, which I was a little disappointed by, because I was like, oh, I'm curious how this goes. So it just goes right into what the terms were. And so you see it printed in a newspaper. And you see Harry reading it, and then Mick's coming back on the boat and saying, so they couldn't get necessarily the Republic of Ireland, but they were transitioned to a free state, and they'd get to have their own government, but they'd still have to swear loyalty to the British Crown.
Which I thought was so interesting that they're called the Free State, but they have to swear loyalty to Britain. It's very like Orwellian. It's like, oh, we can say that you're free, but you sort of are, but you sort of aren't. But the swearing allegiance was the big sticking point, and DeValera is mad. He is mad.
So here we get into Dev pissed off that Mick has published what the terms of the treaty were in the paper without Dev's approval, and so here we come to this, like you said, one of those theories is that in Mick saying that Dev sent them there because he knew that this is the best they could get. Dev didn't want to be the one to bring home the bad news, so he sent Collins instead. But yeah, so at this point we get what looks like a meeting of whatever form of government they have, and some of the ministers. Well, I guess this is like an actual formal cabinet meeting with more people, and not held in like a dungy, bombed out building,
right?
But actually formed, in a real government-y looking building.
Yeah. I mean, it's the Irish Parliament.
Yeah. But yeah, so you have the two sides of the part. Those who are pro the treaty and those who are against it arguing whether or not we should vote for it. And so they, in a, what was do you remember what the vote was? It was like 7 minutes or 50. Here it is, 64, 57, supporting the treaty.
Right.
And then Dev and all of his supporters resign in protest, including Harry, and this is where, it gets a little tricky.
So I sort of felt like the movie didn't explicitly state it, but I kind of felt like part of the reason why Harry left was because of the whole Kitty situation, that she recently confessed that she was in love with Collins and not him.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, I think they didn't need to flat out say it. I think there was enough in the way he was acting to sort of just hint at that, which is, yeah, like I said, enough.
Yep. But either way, it gets ugly, and it looks like there could be a civil war coming.
Yeah.
The next scene,
Dev is out there.
The next scene we have briefly is a ceremony to take down the British flag at Dublin Castle, which I have also been to, and it's now used for visits from heads of state. Collins is wearing a military uniform.
Yeah, that was wondering about that. Where did he get that uniform? And like, who decided on? Okay, these are going to be the Irish, uniforms.
Well, I mean, somebody decided it, but he was effectively put in charge of the Free State Army. Mm-hmm. And if you're a soldier, it's interesting that he became a soldier without having any formal military experience.
Yeah, that's true.
Just his general mayhem background. So then we get opposing speeches. DeValera speaks against the treaty. If it is only with civil war that we can get Irish independence, then so be it.
Yes. So he's doing a speech, and at the same time, Collins is doing a speech supporting it. Although we actually kind of skipped over the fact that they actually that the people voted on the treaty and that they won.
Okay, yeah, that's also true. That's also important.
Yeah.
Good point. Collins is making a speech, and then a bunch of people ride by on horses and throw rocks at him, and then a couple of gunmen jump out.
Yeah, there's a guy with a Tommy gun firing into the air. Although I thought the Tommy gun wasn't invented till like the 30s. Although what time? Yeah, so this is like still 1920s.
Yeah. I mean, of course, the gangsters in the 1920s used the Tommy gun.
That's true. Yeah, you're right.
So they existed, but then the guy with the Tommy gun gets stopped by Kitty with a pistol.
That was surprising. I was like, wait, whoa, she's like, what is she? I was like, when she went up to him, like, whoa, what is she doing? And then she pulled a gun out of somewhere. Like, wow, okay, that I was not expecting that.
She didn't seem to be involved with the revolution at all. I mean, she liked hanging around with Collins, but she never struck me as like a true believer until that. Mm-hmm. So the treaty is carried. DeValera refuses to support it. And then Collins has a confrontation with a bunch of young soldiers. And
where were they occupying?
Well, there's a reference to the Four Courts, which is in Dublin, but that's not where they were. They were just in some other building. Brendan Gleeson, who of course shows up in every movie about Ireland, comments that the army is split down the middle. Mm-hmm. There's a brief scene with Kitty and Collins talking about lovey-dovey stuff, but she almost gets shot by a sniper during that part.
Right, but this is also where he proposes marriage, and she actually agrees. It's like just like that.
What? I mean, I guess a brush with death makes you feel like makes you want to settle down.
Yeah. So, and as this is happening, we'll have a meeting between Harry and Collins, where Harry. Well, see, this is why I said you don't really just tell them that to have them like flat out say that this partly is because Collins and Kitty are getting closer, because you could just see it in his face. Like, he is not, like, when he says, "So is it true then I heard you're engaged?" It's like, oh, and you just see on his face, oh, this is not just about, the treaty. It's also about Kitty. And so they have this argument, and basically Collins says, I was good at, what is it? I was good at doing, general mayhem, and like I'm afraid that if I start it up again, I won't stop. And Harry's like, well, then don't start it. And I thought it was very interesting to see that. All right, Collins is having to be the exact opposite of where he started out. He is having to be the government.
Yeah, you noticed that, huh?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
It's very ironic.
Yeah. And so you have scenes of after they have their argument, as they're having their argument rather, one of the young new revolutionaries comes into the room with a gun, like threatening to shoot Collins, and Harry's like, put the gun down, and he's still not putting the gun. And Harry has to actually wrestle it out of the guy's hands, and tells Collins to get out of there. And then we get some more general mayhem happening. And so I found it, like I said, very interesting how the irony of the sides being switched. And now Collins is on the side where they have tanks and uniforms and everything.
Yeah. Armored car is the same armored car that we saw at the football game.
Mm-hmm.
And so this was the other major question. So I know I mentioned earlier that I was critical of Collins's effective, insurgency, terror war, whatever you want to call it. Is this so much better though?
Yeah, I don't know.
I know it's not.
No.
It's just worse in its own way.
Yeah.
And so, interestingly enough, to point out, I was reading a little back on Wikipedia, and there was going to be more Civil War stuff, but they toned it down and added more love stuff because while they were filming it in 1994, the Northern Irish Ireland conflict reignited.
Oh, the Troubles. Yes.
Right. So they didn't want to kind of pour salt on that wound by reminding people of when the Irish fought each other before.
That's probably a good idea.
Mm-hmm. But it does contribute to the sort of epicness of this movie that we had. The big epic fight in the beginning, and then now a big epic fight towards the end. So then we also have Harry Boland's death.
Yeah, so he's part of one of these, raids that's going on, where they shoot up, a cafe or whatnot, and he's running, and then he's basically, I think he's the only one left alive, so he runs. And the Free State Army catches up to him, and he gets shot multiple times as he's going through, some sewers, and then going out through a warehouse, and then finally into the water.
Yes, through catacombs.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Did you visit those too?
I did not visit those.
Shame. But yeah, so he's shot. He's trying to cross the river, and while all this is happening, Collins hears that that Harry's on the run and is trying to get to him, and by the time they finally catch up, Harry is strung up, dead, and of course,
big time, really dead.
Yeah, Collins is pissed.
Mm-hmm. And upset. I mean, he says he wasn't one of them; he was one of us.
Mm-hmm.
Which, of course, was true.
Yeah.
So then we get DeValera passes a message to Collins that he's willing to negotiate in West Cork, the last holdout of the anti-treaty forces. Collins is mad to go, but he goes anyway.
Yeah, and also this is actually where Collins is from, so it's so he said they're not going to kill me, in my home county.
Right. So he goes with a convoy of soldiers, goes to a pub, sings "Left Old Skibbereen" again. That kind of comes back. But there's an informer there. Again, very ironic. Now, Dev is the insurgent and he is the oppressor, if that's your perspective.
Yeah.
The same fellow from before, whose name I forget, the one with the mustache.
Joe O'Reilly.
Yeah, Joe O'Reilly catches the informer. The informer says DeValera is there and wants to negotiate peace.
Mm-hmm.
But then it's revealed that DeValera is hiding behind a haystack.
Yep.
And we see him in a moment of vulnerability.
Yeah. So, and there's an ambiguity here of did Dev know what was going to happen next? Mm-hmm. Or did the guy act on his own volition without any sort of any sort of approval from Dev? So it's a little ambiguous.
What exactly happened? But either way, the next we get a very, very dramatic death of Michael Collins, where she's singing. There's more singing of "She Moved Through the Fair." And it's also Julia Roberts' Kitty, is trying on a wedding dress at the same time. But we get our final battle.
Yeah, so the informant tells, without any verbal instruction from Dev, goes back inside and tells him, or tells Collins and Joe that, he'll meet you at this certain place. Mm-hmm. And at a certain time, and so as they're driving over there, they're held up by something, and the informant and a bunch of his men are off on a hill, and they start shooting at the convoy.
Yep. The convoy stops and shoots back.
Yeah, and one of the soldiers manning the Gatling gun is like having trouble. So Joe takes him, here, give me that, and almost managed to shoot a bunch of the assassins. And then as Collins is like moving over to where Joe is, gets shot in the head.
Yep, and just like that, is gone. Effectively, that's like the end of the movie.
Yeah, so it flashes forward to where we started with Joe telling Kitty the story, and saying that what was the line? Saying get off your ass or off and stop mourning me already, something like that.
Yeah, something that's very him.
And then Kitty says he would have said it better though.
Well, that's true. He may not have been one for talking, but he does have a lot of quotable quotes in this movie.
Mm-hmm. And
then the end is footage of his actual funeral in black and white, and a quote from DeValera that says, "I believe I didn't write it down. This is a paraphrase, but he's like, I believe history will vindicate Michael Collins at my expense."
Which, I mean, and I actually read about this, that, what's his name? Roger Ebert talked about that end quote and said that even Dev could have hardly imagined this film biography of Collins, which plays DeValera, as a weak-mannered, sniveling prima donna whose grandstanding led to decades of unnecessary bloodshed in and over Ireland.
It's hard to say. I do feel like the movie does him dirty, but not. I think that's a little bit excessive. But I didn't think he was as bad as Ebert made him sound. What did you think?
Yeah. I not as bad as Ebert, but I definitely think that it's a very Collins-centric view. Well, I mean, his name is in the title. Yeah.
Well, I think the nature of this Hollywood movie is they wanted to put people into neat little piles or neat little boxes. So Harry Boland as the friend turned romantic rival turned enemy, and then DeValera as the rival turned enemy. If there's anything more you want to say about the movie, we can go into spy fact versus fiction.
Yeah, let's go into it.
So, for our spy fact versus fiction today, I read a book called The Longfellow, Big Fellow, which is a joint biography of Collins and DeValera by T. Ryle Dwyer. And I'll say first of all up front that if you want to read it, you better be really into Michael Collins stuff.
Which is why you read it and not me.
Right. There are longer books. There's this one really long one called The Life and Death of Michael Collins. It's like 600 pages. All right. So Michael Collins' father was 75 when he was born. And his father said about him, he'll be a great man yet and will do great things for Ireland. No pressure. So after the Easter uprising, the rebels were not well regarded by the Dublin people. They were pelted with rotten fruit and vegetables, just like the Black and Tans were later. The Dublin people blamed them for the week's destruction and the 262 civilians killed.
Ooh.
Right.
They don't really talk about that.
No, they never do. There's a quote that I don't remember who said it, but this movie really reminded me of it, which is that patriots often talk of dying for their country, but rarely of killing for it. So, yeah, but I mean, in all of these wars, civilians got killed. And at first, the people of Dublin didn't like the revolutionaries, but then changed when the British overreacted with all those executions. The Irish people didn't like that either. So the British failed to capitalize on the situation. The conversation is based on a real conversation where, when the fighting was over, one of Collins' friends says to him, "Well, it was a good fight, Mick." Collins snapped, "What do you mean a good fight? We lost, didn't we?" DeValera, for his part, blamed the people of Dublin for not helping, which reminded me of Les Mis.
Yes, I can see that.
Where they're like, the people will rise with us, and then they didn't.
And then they just shut their windows and doors.
Of course, the General Post Office was not the only place where the uprising took place. They did in many places around Dublin, but the result was still the same. So while he was in prison, Collins set the groundwork for his future intelligence work by making friends and networking and such. The Easter Rebellion was, he realized that Ireland can't fight the British directly because the British are really good at fighting and are really powerful. So you need to come up with the other way, the other plan. That's what we saw, yada, yada, yada. So about the love triangle.
Yeah.
It is in the book a little bit. there's a reference to Harry Boland being in love with Kitty Kiernan, and then at the end it's like, and then Kitty Kiernan was engaged to Michael Collins.
All right.
So I guess some sort of drama happened, but they decided to leave it out of the history books. And her Wikipedia page didn't help either.
Yeah.
So maybe you have to read in more detail if you really want to know, or maybe it's none of our business. So the DeValera escape was mostly correct. He did make keys out of wax with one stolen from a priest, and it did get stuck in the lock. Like in the movie, it got stuck, but Dev was able to knock it out with his own key. But then they just ran away. He didn't dress up as a woman. That's a little Hollywood embellishment.
Yeah.
Roy worked as an official typist. He wasn't like a spy or like a tailor. Or
that's disappointing.
Or an informant or whatever. But every time he would type a report, he added an extra carbon paper underneath it, which he would give to Collins.
See, that I would have liked to see.
Yeah. I know. And also, the most important thing about Roy is he wasn't killed.
Yeah,
he lived until 1972 and was the president of Ireland's Olympic Committee. So they also talked a lot about Dev's trip to America, because that wasn't in the movie because it's not about him. And basically the argument he was making was that the U.S. had just fought a war about self-determination, that the U.S. was going to stand up for small countries like Belgium who were being invaded by large countries. So Dev was like, yo, we are a small country. We're being occupied by a strong country. What about our right of self-determination? He also saw Irish Americans as being helpful for the cause because sort of like Jewish people, they are a minority, but they turn out to vote a lot and they are very heavily involved with political things. They also live in large urban areas.
Interesting.
So Dev courted both political parties to try to get help, but he encountered that Irish Americans were split on the issue. Because although Irish Americans do like Ireland, they're not as willing to get involved in like Irish politics. And they also saw themselves as American first and didn't want to go against their own government, just for DeValera's sort of thing. So he was disappointed about that.
Yeah.
Collins, for his part, while he was active, would just walk around in public or on a bike without a disguise or a weapon. Some of the British detectives knew who he was, but he was so scary that they didn't want to arrest him because they were afraid his bodyguards would just jump out and kill them right then and there.
So was he actually an imposing, like a big figure, like a tall guy? Like,
sorry,
because they kept referring to him as the big fellow.
It's funny that you asked that, because that was something the book points out, is that his nickname was the big fellow, and he was big, but he wasn't as big as Liam Neeson was. He was like 6'1", but he was more big because of his sort of big personality.
So something else I forgot to mention about him being arrested, or like about them recognizing him but not going to do anything, was they were also afraid he was going to take revenge on their families later, which of course that's like the definition of terrorism. So then Bloody Sunday. All right, let's talk about Bloody Sunday. The football game with the armored car. So there was a football game. There were 5,000 people there, and a convoy of troops, including auxiliaries and the Black and Tans, approached the park. Their orders were to surround it, search everybody there. But as soon as they arrived, shots were being fired for some reason. They claim they were being fired on first, but it's never been proven. Classic British and Ireland move. But regardless, they just sort of started firing at spectators from outside. So, I mean, it was definitely a massacre of innocent people. But the thing in the thing where it just kind of drives in, sits there, and then just starts shooting people was not correct. Smythe, who my understanding was that was Charles Dance, was Constable, or was Colonel Ferguson Smythe. He was the RIC divisional commander, and he said, this is a quote from him: "Sinn Féin has had all the sport up to the present, and we are going to have sport now. We must take the offensive and beat Sinn Féin at their own tactics. If persons approaching carry their hands in their pockets or are suspicious looking, shoot them down. You may make mistakes occasionally and innocent people may be shot, but that cannot be helped. No policeman will get into trouble for shooting any man." And in response, Constable Jeremiah Mee said, "By your accent, I take it you are an Englishman, and in your ignorance, you forgot you are addressing Irishmen." He took off his cap and belt and tossed on the table. "These two are English, so take them." So as harsh as the movie is to the British, I'm not sure it was harsh enough. I think they kind of needed stuff like that to make it clear what the stakes were.
Yeah.
So Smythe was later killed by the IRA, but the author of the book admitted that it's not really that different from what the IRA was doing. Collins even said, we may make mistakes in the beginning and shoot the wrong people. So there you go. The Black and Tans rampaged at one point, killing 9 civilians. Churchill thought that the security forces were getting out of hand, drinking and thieving and destroying indiscriminately. But he agreed that there should be reprisals, but just have them be regulated. So it's like, all right. Okay, I'm almost done. So Collins' death, like the Kennedy assassination, is unclear. He was shot in the head, but there's also a point where he left the protection of the armored car and moved along the road, stood in the open and kept shooting. And then that was when he was hit. It's not clear who killed him at first. And I do agree that Ebert's sort of insinuation that DeValera was behind it is not supported at all.
Well, Ebert's not the one who sort of who imagined that. I think it's more of the movie is unclear about it, and you could interpret it either way. Okay.
Well, according to the book and sort of backed up on Wikipedia too, it was Irish, anti-treaty forces who killed him, but there's no evidence that DeValera wanted him to be killed. And it's not cool that the movie said that he was. He was supposed to be married 4 months later, or Collins was supposed to be married 4 months after he was killed. Harry Boland's death is also wrong.
Yeah, I read about that.
He was shot while Irish Free State soldiers tried to arrest him at a hotel, and it's unclear exactly what happened. But he was unarmed at the time, so it could have easily been like a murder. But his death did make Collins motivated to pursue peace more than he was. The Irish Civil War would rage on. The Irish Free State eventually became an Irish Republic in 1937, and DeValera became president.
Interesting.
Because the whole war...
Collins was right then. He's like, it would be a stepping stone to the Republic, and no, then that's the whole reason why he resigned and all that. So Collins was right.
That's true. History did vindicate him as DeValera predicted. Also, the whole thing about the swearing the loyalty oath. So in 1937, Ireland was like, we're not going to sign this or do this loyalty oath anymore. Do something about it. And Britain was like, no. So there you go. But it's an interesting question. See, there's so much going on in this movie. There's another question is when do you compromise? Because Americans love Churchill. They hate Chamberlain. Maybe that's not the best example of what I'm trying to say. But they love people who are stand up and fight and never give in and never give them anything. Compromising is for weak people.
All right. So before we get into our ratings, do you want to do favorite quote?
Okay. Here's my favorite quote. Ready? Collins during the insurgency reads a book, reads a newspaper, and he finds that one of the targets was riddled with bullets. He says, riddled? Bullets don't grow on trees, You did well, but lay off the riddling.
What did bullets not grow on?
Trees. I guess that was before that became a cliche. How about yourself?
So it's when the handover is happening, and you have the British officer looking at his pocket watch and says, "You're 7 minutes late, Mr. Collins." And Collins says, "You kept us waiting for 700 years. You can keep your 7 minutes."
Ayo. I also like the part where he's like, "Do I get to wear that hat?"
I did like that. Yeah.
from the same point. So, all right, it is time for our ratings between 1 to 10 martinis. 1 being absolutely terrible, 10 being unbelievably great. And what did you also sort of our opportunity to wrap up our thoughts about the movie? So, What did you think of Michael Collins?
So, I'm gonna give it a 4. It's a good movie, but it's a terrible spy movie.
Well, okay.
And I mean, this is a spy movie podcast, so I'm gonna judge it not on just on it being a movie, but also on it shows a few things about intelligence, but on the whole, if I'm looking to watch a spy movie, this is never going to be on the top of my list.
So maybe we had different expectations going in.
Mm-hmm.
That's fine. It is, of course, your opinion. I, on the other hand, will give it an 8 out of 10.
Ooh, all right.
And I freely admit that I am biased because I am into Ireland, Irish history, Irish music, all of that stuff. Mm-hmm. But I think besides that, it is one of the old school epic historical dramas that I quite enjoy. It is actors that we really like, and unlike other movies, and I don't want to like dump on other movies that we've covered, so I won't name them. It's not a criticism, but unlike other sort of spy movies, there's a lot, as I said, there's a lot going on. There's like a message to it. There's these deep historical questions that it brings up. And so if you're into Irish stuff at all, I think it's like a must watch personally, even if it's not your traditional spy movie.
Yeah. Well, that's it for Michael Collins. Thank you for joining us. You can find us on social media at the Spy-Fi Guys on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And until next time, I've been Christian.
And I've been Zach.
And we are the Spy-Fi Guys, signing off. Thank you for listening to the Spy-Fi Guys. If you enjoyed our podcast, please be sure to give us a 5-star rating on iTunes. The theme song from this podcast is Mistake the Getaway by Kevin MacLeod from Incompetech.com, licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 3.0. Films, books, and television shows reviewed by our podcast are the intellectual property of their respective copyright holders, and no infringement is intended.
This is a personal podcast. Any views, statements, or opinions expressed in this podcast are personal and belong solely to the participants. They do not represent those of people, institutions, or organizations that the participants may or may not be associated with in a professional or personal capacity unless explicitly stated. Any views or opinions are not intended to malign any religion, ethnic group, club, organization, company, or individual.
You can find our podcast on social media at The Spy-Fi Guys on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.